5 words on it. We want to say that Dutch industry should use Dutch cables. And this is what he did with those little typewritten words, turned them into this dynamic and engaging composition. Part of his philosophy was that modern society has such a high-speed pace, and this is 50 years ago, before TV, that people don't have time to sit there and read essays about why people in Holland ought to use Dutch cables, sort of a nationalist appeal. So the message should be projected with immediacy, almost a kind of telegraphic shorthand, and with a physical, visual vitality to give it reach. The O's here are the O's in a series of words, and when Peterswort looked at his copy with this attitude he had toward form and structure and saw that all of these words had an O in it, he just stacked these big O's down the page and then balanced them with these 2 bars coming up from the bottom. I might comment that one thing that's important here is to have a client who has a visual sensitivity and an understanding of design to permit someone to operate at this level of innovation in making messages. The message here is sort of a special offer. We read the numbers 50,000 plus 13,000 equals 50,000. That mathematics doesn't quite work. And over here, 1, 2, 3, they're telling you about this deal, about for a limited time only, through January 1, 1926, you can make 50,000 equal 50,000 plus 13,000. Note how those 3 O's on the right-hand side are made up of curved typographic elements and straight typographic elements, so that they become the 3 O's for all 3 sets of numbers. We're very fortunate that Peterswort did some work for the English so we can read it. An interesting phenomena happens when we look at typographic designs in a language that we cannot read or understand. We look at them as form. Then we turn around and see something in a language we do understand. We primarily approach that from the standpoint of message or communication. Breakdown. Total up the losses in case of breakdown. Why risk breakdown? Put an NCW cable between you and the risk of breakdown. Safe! Exclamation mark. The photographs become support images for the typography. Why it says, why risk breakdown? We see this businessman holding his head. The cables broke down. They're running under the Atlantic Ocean and we can't send phone messages or what have you. Note the overlapping of form, how the exclamation mark and the question mark become exaggerated to emphasize that quality of question and answer. Something that's operative here is a principle that Ben Day calls call and response, question and answer. Designs that pose a question and then answer it can be a very effective way to engage the audience in the visual communication. Those big circles are O's. They're also cables serving a dual function. Then from the standpoint of the viewer turns that page and comes to this page. And this is so unlike the clutter and cluster of so much graphic material that those O's also become very powerful punches in the eye. You have to look at those forms when you turn this page, and you have to read those words, because what essentially are 2 completely abstract forms engage you and you want to know what it means. After making a very rough layout, Zwart's method of working was to go ahead and order a bunch of type, get a lot of type in, and then start composing it there on his drawing board. He was a collagist, essentially. Or go ahead and make the photographs, or have them made, and then work with them. In this particular composition, essentially the message translated would say that if you have a maintenance problem with any of our products, you call us and we'll send a specialist out within the hour or within the day right away. So we have 3 photographs. One is a photograph of a man calling on the phone. There's a line that goes through him and across the clock and across the briskly walking figure. Second big image is a clock to symbolize time and the speed that this will occur. The third image is this man who's dispatched and is rapidly on his way. I wish this were in color. The line of type across the top is telegraphic outprint on a yellow bar, just like the yellow outprint in the telegraphs that used to be a very popular and important form of communication. The little photograph up in the right-hand corner of the telegraph pole is redundant in a sense. He's telling you through 2 symbols the immediacy of telegraphic communication. One is through the telegraph output on the yellow bar, the yellow tape that comes out of the telegraph machine. The other is the telegraph pole. It's important that he vignetted this photograph of the man on the phone as a circle because that repeats the circular form of the clock and relates those 2 images. I've always been somewhat bemused by that man on the phone. He becomes such a stereotype for the sort of lower level managerial person, almost a parody of our idea of a person in that type of job, the guy who calls a repairman when the equipment breaks. A real masterpiece of composition. All this complex information is put together, horizontals, verticals, and diagonals. Here's the same piece by Peterswort, which is turned on its side, and we can see how that it works either way, the way the type runs horizontally and vertically and diagonally. Let's jump back a bit. Something else happens too, the color changes. This is the original. This was photographed from the original printed piece. This is reproduced from a book on 20th century typography in which they didn't quite have the right colors, so they went ahead and printed in the closest things they have. An interesting thing happens when you look at things in facsimile. You think of them in terms of the facsimile rather than in terms of the way they really were. An important concept is visual flow, the designer's ability to move the reader forward through a booklet or a magazine or a book. Peterswort was very much concerned with visual flow, and something that I'm sure the de Stael artist found to be reprehensible is the way he would pull out these little typographic pointing hands and use them in his work. But since he was interested in movement and flow, this became a way to emphasize that. This is probably the most expansive piece of visual flow to try to get somebody to turn the page and read on I've ever seen. This huge enlargement of a hand pointing you forward into the book, reinforced by 4 of these upside-down typographic hands on the left-hand margin and 4 right-side up ones on the right-hand margin. And the type expands as you get to that last word, and those leaders reinforce that, and everything is visually telling you to turn that page and get this information and get involved in the message. A lot of the people we've looked at, such as Theo van Doesburg, very much involve themselves in fine arts and in design. Peterswort apparently had virtually no involvement in fine arts activities, having begun his career working in applied arts areas. To the best of my knowledge, he only did 2 pieces of fine arts, and both were prints made from typographic material, ruled bars and lines, which were printed here in 2 colors. This one has a strong horizontal and vertical movement. Its companion piece is this piece. It's a wonderful diagonal composition. A publicity piece for a printer and typesetter. Basically, the message in that little line of type down at the bottom advises you that they have a large collection of fonts of type, all the sizes and styles you might be interested in. Zwart illustrates this by physically showing the range and creating this dynamic, almost flamboyant composition with letters from the smallest sizes available up to the largest sizes available in the overprinting of the color. Something that's real important is the way he ran those little lines of types, the CCCCC and TTTTT, which are repeated. They do 2 things. One thing is they repeat the line of type that's the headline of the message and relate it to the other typographic material. Also, they hold this design together. If you didn't have that 8 or 9 lines of horizontal movement, this thing would separate itself into 2 complexes. But those lines moving across serve as visual connectors that organize that into a total composition. This is a proposal study that Peterswort made for an exhibition stand for one of his clients. It would be placed in the corner, and the walls would be painted, and then these 2 structures coming out into the space would define the space in 2 ways. It would physically design the space. This is a space that this company has for their exhibition, and their salesmen will be here, and their literature will be on those shelves. It also defines a space psychologically because of the ambience that's created by those structures. They're really sculptures. And note how the gray is painted on the walls and the floor, and how that gray relates to the shells, and then how the shells relate to the 2 structures. Here's a close-up of one side. He's painted the various planes of those boards in the primary colors. And as you move through the space, and all of a sudden you see the bottom of these boards, and you see that vibrant blue against the red, and all of a sudden you see the tips of the boards, which are yellow. It changes and it becomes kinetic as you move past it, and it grabs and engages your vision. This close-up shows the structure that he used with horizontal and vertical and diagonal boards that are put together structurally so that they support each other. I used an extreme wide-angle lens when I photographed this reproduction of this exhibition stand, and so the angles and the movements are exaggerated a little bit. Sort of like a 3-dimensional Mondrian painting when you start seeing details. This exhibition stand becomes a real delight for the eye. When it was created for an exhibition and replication, I noted that people would keep coming back and looking at it, and people would lean down and look through it and move around it, just sort of enjoying the visual quality of these lines in space and the colors and the way they interacted one with another. A film poster. Several things are of interest here. The way the ITF, which is set in very light, large type, is emphasized by these red bars, which are printed down the vertical stroke. Let's say something about film in the center of this big blue square. Zwart has a blue halftone of someone's eyes and then a strip of film. It very literally says, "Look at film." Once again, he's using overprinting to make additional colors. For example, the red and blue overprint to make purple. That word film and the type on the blue in the original would appear as purple. Here in the slide it goes darker. Time and again, Zwart returned to this problem of using photographs and composing with photographs. This is very innovative. The subject here is a linotype typesetting machine, or similar to that if it's not linotype specifically. The photograph of the equipment is silhouetted and it shows the complexity of this machine. The photograph of the two operators is screened down to be very gray, very pale, to push it back in space so type can run across it. The third photograph is four linotype matrices, and they're photographed two standing up, two lying down, and then the shadow of the two tall ones is kept to turn that into a visual configuration of lines that actually move in perspective with this line of type. So the diagonals in the three photographs are carefully orchestrated and composed to bring unity to the image. This has been attributed to Pete Zwart. I rather think that it's by someone else. It does create a field of tension, a spatial dynamic that relates to Pete Zwart. The cropping is interesting here to symbolize the modern dance of the 20s and 30s. It's actually 1927, I believe. This photograph of this girl's legs in a short skirt, what are they called, the mini skirts of the 20s, becomes very dominant and prominent, and it gives a structure against which virtual chaos can be created in the background. Let's move on to N.K. Berkman, a very enigmatic and tragic figure. Berkman, before World War I, as a young man, was involved in a family-owned business which was a large and prosperous printing firm. The economic dislocations of the war, plus some other problems having to do with divorce and family situations and all, created a situation where he ended up with a small print shop in rented space with a couple of hand presses practically and a limited amount of type. He was running a printing business that we might compare to a speedy print type place today, where you get small jobs done very quickly. People would come in and say, "Print me some business cards," and he would set up type by hand and print them, or print me some stationery or invoices. He was very much into the modern art movement, and in addition to his commercial work, he would do research, sort of experimentation. Basically what he did is he turned the flatbed of the letterpress into an instrument for composing and painting. He did a periodic